There was recently a rather prominent debate held between two individuals in the political sphere, Michael Knowles and Brad Polumbo at the University of Pittsburgh, about the following proposition: should transgenderism be regulated by law? Now, I must say that both debaters made some pretty interesting and compelling points, and I think that the debate as a whole was well organized. I must say that the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, which was the host organization for the debate, actually did a rather wonderful job. And I must say, the reaction to the debate, which involved burning Michael Knowles in effigy and other, acts of presumed violence and acts of intimidation, is unfortunate and a reflection of the illiberal culture of so many young leftists today and the illiberal effects of progressivism as a whole. But while the two debaters made a lot of good points, their conversation and treatment of the subject merely scratched the surface of an otherwise intricate and complex issue. Indeed, for example, Michael Knowles attacked the idea of value neutrality, the idea that the law could be neutral toward the question of transgenderism and take no stance, but he did not expand his critique of this principle beyond the example of transgender bathrooms and, in some cases, transgender sport leagues. He did not even effectively argue that this issue should at all be handled by the law. Whereas Brad Polumbo, for example, merely invoked freedom and pluralism as platitudes without fully articulating an alternative to what Knowles was suggesting and not rooting his objection to what Knowles was suggesting in first principles. Before I continue on with my critiques of both debaters and their performance, allow me to summarize what both debaters were arguing. Michael Knowles is arguing in the affirmative of the proposition that transgenderism should be regulated by law, and some of his arguments include the fact that there are certain areas of society that the law already addresses, and transgenderism, by virtue of being in those areas, will have to be addressed by law. Areas such as women's bathrooms or sports leagues or things of that sort. And so his primary argument is that it's inevitable that law will address it anyway. So it's no longer a question about should the law address it. It's a question of it's already being addressed. So how do we put the law in place to address it? So he's already accepting the premise as a given. Whereas Polumbo says this should be a matter relegated to private individuals in their own communities and not really addressed by the government. These are the two positions of the debaters. Now, Polumbo, to reinforce his argument, he, in his opening statement, invoked popular opinion to object against Knowles' points. I'll show you a little bit of that clip right now.
About 30% of the United States identifies as socially conservative. About 23% identifies as Catholic, which is Michael's faith. And I'm from New England, so that I know that a lot of those Catholics are actually pretty libbed out. So what you have is a minority of the country, a small minority, that actually holds ultra-traditionalist beliefs on social issues. So if we want to start having the majority rules approach of suppressing lifestyles you don't approve of shutting down ideas, of banning ideas and lifestyles that aren't in alignment with your values, that is not going to go well for my friends on the religious right.
So he basically cited a low amount of Catholics in America and the popular sentiment of a lot of people in America concerning the issue of transgenderism. And he basically said that it's wrong-headed to push these policies because people wouldn't agree with them. Now, of course, this is not a substantive critique. Truth is not a popularity contest. Truth is a matter of universal affirmation. Truth is resolute, and it is ever present, no matter who agrees with it or who does not agree with it. And really, this reflects a broader problem in political conversation. You may see some of your favorite pundits doing it. You may see someone in a Facebook comment section doing it. But too many people reason by means of statistics as opposed to asking the question, what can I reasonably infer from these statistics? And how do I make an argument on the basis of that reasonable inference? What do I mean? So, for example, it is not enough to say, a often cited statistic, that black people have X disparity against white people. Black people use marijuana at the same rate as white folks, but are charged more or whatever. It's not enough to say that, because you have to actually explain, okay, what variables go into that assessment. Okay, and what areas are black folks charged more than white folks? Okay, what do you mean by the same offense? What methodology are they using? All these other questions. And then, after you've established that this is a sound claim, you can deduce what it may mean, and that's when you get into the argument part. But so many people these days just like to throw around statistics and say, hey, this stat says this stat says that, therefore I'm right because I have the most stats. No, reasoning by means of stats and by means of averages is a very inferior way of pursuing knowledge. Something is true or not true on the basis of if it is true on its premises, if it is true on its own merits. Statistics help reinforce the truth of something, sure, but they are not the end-all, be-all of that truth. And again, this problem was not just seen with Polumbo. I'm speaking on him. Knowles himself said he doesn't actually trust the social science and data he was using to debate his points, but since they all reinforce his points, since they benefit him, he'll use them. Go.
So Brad points out that Blair, who's a very nice guy, as I pointed out, might feel better by being allowed to go into a women's bathroom. I'm skeptical of that. None of the data, which I always think are ridiculous, but I'm happy to cite social science when it backs up my point. Well, I would just like to correct you, Leah. You've said that I've had varying degrees of confidence in the scientific studies. I have no confidence in any of them. I'm just citing them because they back up my argument.
What would you actually like to see studied? I mean it, right? Like,
kudos for honesty.
Once again, this proves my initial statement that the debate lacks significant philosophical grounding. How can you make a statement like that and expect to be taken serious in an intellectual manner if you don't believe that social science is a sound way of drawing forth reasoned conclusions and then deducing from those conclusions policy prescriptions? Why would you go into a debate centered on policy in America, particularly a country founded on first principles and sound moral grounding, and then you use those stats despite not truly believing them? Again, it seems ridiculous to me. So this lack of philosophical grounding just didn't translate into trivial errors. It caused the substance of the debate to suffer. There is one major ethical issue that could put the entire matter of transgenderism and regulation by the government to rest that was not expounded upon by either debaters. And it primarily went addressed by Knowles. And that is, and Polumbo could have capitalized on this, and that is the distinction between what is permissible and what is preferable. Knowles kept saying transgenderism is not true, and since it is not true, it's not good, and it should not really be permitted. It should be regulated by law. And Polumbo kept saying, well, hold on, people can decide what is true for themselves. It's not up to you to decide that. I'll show you this right here.
Here is, what is a man, what is a woman? And I am not happy with even the conservative answer, which is a woman is a womb and 2X chromosomes. I don't know what 2X chromosomes are. If you told me that a woman is sugar, spice, and everything nice, that to me is a much more precise description and accurate description of what a woman is. So I'm happy to have those conversations.
But I don't think that is the question. I think the question is who gets to decide. If you would have the government decide for everyone, and I would have people decide for themselves in their own law.
Let me ask you.
And so it just came down to these competing claims about what's true and what's not true and what does that actually mean. But the true distinction here is what is permissible and what is preferable. What is permissible and what is preferable. So, in ethics, we call this a distinction between primary virtues and secondary virtues. At least this is what one of my favorite philosopher, Lord Kames, had to say in his book, Essays on the Principles of Natural Religion and Moral Philosophy, in which he said primary virtues are behaviors that the existence of society and interpersonal relationships require to happen, such as the preservation of justice, respecting contracts, not stealing from people, not killing people. And these are matters that law are intimately involved with. Whereas secondary virtues are merely behaviors that enhance a society, that make it a better place, make its character better, but these are not permissible by law because these, again, are areas that these are behaviors that are specific and particular to people, and they are not necessary for the preservation of the society. So, one category is very clearly a subject of law, whereas the other is not. If this basic distinction was taken care of, then this question could have been put to rest a long time ago. That transgenderism, according to some, is not preferable for many reasons, but is it permissible? Well, someone having a certain perception of themselves, and then, with that perception, transforming their body with surgery is permissible, because every man is a self-governing entity on the basis of first principles. You cannot, on one hand, accept the existence of individual freedom, and on the other hand, try to deny that kind of individual freedom by inserting your taste into someone else's behaviors. Behaviors that do not violate the rights or the primary virtues that a society needs to remain intact. You can say that it's not preferable for someone to be transgender, but you cannot say that it is not permissible. Of course it's permissible. It's permissible for you to go ahead and be a Scientologist, for you to go ahead and be an alcoholic, for you to go ahead and be a drug addict, for all kinds of things. For you to go ahead and be a gamer, a YouTuber, all kinds of things are permissible. But is it preferable? And that's going to be a much more interesting conversation that will ultimately, in some cases, devolve into the subjective. But if that distinction had been made in this debate, Knowles' basis for wanting to regulate transgenderism would have been utterly undercut because that basis has a very faulty moral foundation to it, one that does not acknowledge this key distinction. This leads me neatly into my next point. Another fault in Knowles' argument is that he assumes that law is the basis for the perception of women and truth in general in a society. This is a fundamentally deterministic view and a view of the world that is top-down and not bottom-up. Society is bottom-up, not top-down. No one told you to watch this video. You are choosing upon your own free will to do so. And even if someone did tell you, no one is taking a gun to your head and forcing you to do it. And even if they are doing it, I'm sorry about that, but you get my point in general. You're the exception, not the rule. The law reflects the sentiments of a society, although ideally, it should not do this entirely. It should, but it shouldn't solely reflect sentiments. It should also reflect first principles. But not the other way around. Society does not reflect the sentiments of the law. Politics is downstream of culture. Culture is not downstream of politics. The law is the imposition of force towards the furtherance of a goal. And force cannot create anything. Force merely stops something. It preserves what is already there. Knowles' suggestion that the law is the central question here reflects his misunderstanding of how human relationships work. Now, I have criticisms for Polumbo as well. Brad continued to argue that everyone should decide on their own for them what a woman is, not the government. Now, while I do agree the government has no business in telling you what to believe, this argument does not satisfy the underlying argument that Knowles was trying to make, as I've shown you in a few clips. And Knowles was trying to get at this point. What does a society which denies objective truth look like? Brad didn't really respond substantively, which made his argument suffer. In fact, when he was asked about the age of consent in adulthood in society, he said, look, I can't really tell you what an adult is because nothing magical happens on your 18th birthday, and if I tried to, it would be arbitrary. Thus, avoiding giving a solid answer to this question. And of course, when the subject of trans kids comes around, the age of consent, adulthood, all of these things are incredibly important so as to delineate what is permissible and what is preferable. As we said previously. Now, while Brad denied the charge of moral relativism, which the moderator kind of tried to say he was leaning into, which, by the way, he was not being a relativist, I don't think. He did do something else, though. He does not seem concerned with the importance of foundations to understand greater meaning. Brad was not making a philosophical argument here. He was making the basis form of the live and let live argument, which is the problem. I myself am sympathetic to Brad. I myself do believe in the idea that consent and harm are the cornerstones of moral thinking of any free society and any moral society, but I do not accept the idea that everyone should have their own private definition of the truth, and we should all equally respect those definitions on a societal level. No, the truth is the truth no matter who says it, no matter who wants it to be something else, and that must be asserted, not by the government. This is where Knowles got it wrong. Not by the government, but by individuals undertaking discourse with their rational powers as human beings and asserting the truth through reason and in voluntary context. That is how you spark revolutions in the minds and the hearts of men, through that kind of transformation. Brad could have tightened his case if he appealed to this sense of social corrective that I just mentioned, but he did not. Instead, he simply wanted to resign the issue entirely to subjective interpretation. And he also could have said that social corrective undertaken through discourse and reason amongst free people would be the proper corrective to mistruth rather than regulation, which Knowles favors, because regulation is oftentimes undertaken on the basis of fundamentally subjective calculations. Politicians are not impartial arbiters of truth. Politicians are seekers of their own self-interest, as public choice economics so dutifully informs us. Also, the age of adulthood is not arbitrary. The age of adulthood is based on development, and development is a very concrete thing. There is every difference in the world between a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old. And while some differences are murky, yes, development is the standard for what is appropriate for someone of a given age. So again, it's important to assert these concrete bases for some of these protections and some of these ideas without dismissing them and being hand-wavy, because they may benefit you amidst a debate. So, to answer the question, oh, by the way, who do I think won the debate? I don't think anyone won, in all honesty. I don't think anyone won. I think we all, in a sense, lost, because both debaters didn't have much substantive philosophical grounding. Both of them are very smart. Brad Polumbo, I'll be honest, I've known Brad Polumbo for years. Brad Polumbo, when I was first starting off my career, actually edited a lot of my articles. I don't really write anymore. Many of you don't know about that, but he edited a lot of my articles and things of that sort. So I've known Brad for years. I've corresponded with Brad. I've met Brad. I think he's a very smart guy. I don't always agree on everything, but I think he's a smart guy. I've met Michael Knowles before. I think he's a smart guy as well. I think they're both very smart, and this is not to detract from their value as commentators or whatever, but neither of them addressed this issue with the appropriateness and the seriousness that it deserved. And so for that, neither of them, in my opinion, won. Now, as to the question as should transgenderism be regulated by law, if I were tapped to debate Knowles on this, which, by the way, I'd be more than happy to do, as someone who does share similar metaphysical foundations to Michael Knowles, but who has a more nuanced view on this than he does, and a more individualistic view on this than he does, I would be more than happy to debate him. But here's the thing. I would not have accepted that title, should transgenderism be regulated by law, as a title, as a debate proposition, because it is so murky. It is so subjective. It is so open-ended. What do you mean, should transgenderism be regulated by law? Do you mean, should transgender surgeries be regulated by law? Do you mean, should transgender identification be regulated by law? Do you mean, should transgender teaching be regulated by law? Do you mean, should transgender children getting surgeries get regulated? Like, what do you mean? It's so open-ended and murky that it allows the conversation, or basically enables the conversation, not to be grounded in anything concrete and to yet be taken to a conclusion by platitudes that can get us nowhere except where we started off at. So, let me rephrase the question. Is there a legitimate basis to regulate particular behaviors relating to transgenderism? And to that, I say, in most cases, no. When it comes to protecting children, you have removed them from the category of transgenderism and placed them in the category of child welfare. Child welfare is not the same category as transgenderism. No matter how much some people try to make it, it is not the same category. It is a morally and fundamentally different thing. Transgenderism is the act of identifying with a particular gender or a particular sex that does not reflect your biological wiring that you perceive yourself to be, but implicit in this idea is that you have the ability to perceive yourself to be a certain way and then to act on that. Well, guess what? Anyone in their right mind can do that, but children are not in their right mind. The idea of transgenderism implies that you have to have your powers of reason ripened, your faculties ripened to make such a life-altering decision, and children do not. Minors do not, which is why I don't even believe transgender children exist in the first place. This is a point I think Polumbo should have also made, but he doesn't believe that. He doesn't agree with that. So, in my opinion, the child conversation is separate from the main conversation. And the main conversation is quite simple. In a free society, there are people who have lifestyles you don't like. There are people who have behaviors you don't like. There are behaviors that are not preferable, but are permissible. And if all of us are to act in a manner that is not harmful to the fundamental principles of society, and if all of us are to act in a manner that is respecting of the spirit of the American Constitution and our founding, if all of us are to act in a manner that is respecting of your fellow man, then you must protect the innocent, the meek, the vulnerable, such as children, while allowing those who have the ability to make decisions about themselves, whose faculties of reason have ripened to the extent that they can make decisions about themselves, to go ahead and make their own mistakes. Freedom is about letting people make their own mistakes and learn from them, hopefully, or not learn from them, and they will suffer the consequences. Ultimately, reality wins out no matter what happens. This is not a matter of law. This is a matter of discovery. Because the moment law stands in the way of discovery, the moment law is a substitute for discussion, the moment law becomes a moral arbiter and a moral teacher, or tries to be a moral teacher, is the moment you empower people to do things that are unthinkable. It's the moment you try to use a hammer to fix something that a hammer is not supposed to fix. Whereas a hammer is supposed to fix a nail, using a hammer to go ahead and fix a computer by slamming in the screen because it's not working. You're using the wrong tool for the wrong problem. The law is not the tool for this. Discussion is the tool for this. Reason is the tool for this. And in my opinion, that's where the conversation should begin, and that's where it should end. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, go to my Patreon, patreon.com/Watson. Go to my locals, christianwatson.locals.com. We need more members there. Like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. My friends, help me get out there. Help this message of philosophy and fiery constitutional conservatism continue to prevail and grow so we can grow this movement that we're starting here. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye.